Hello, folks. Happy today. Hope you're doing well. Uh, Please excuse the setting. Our house is packed today with everybody's home and working from home today in my family, so I had to move to the kitchen to do work. So my wife's a vegetarian, so she likes to keep a print of a cow on the wall in the kitchen to remind everybody that eats meat exactly what we're involved in. So please ignore that for now. All right. So, hey, we're getting into the nervous system, looking at how it's built and how it operates. Now, the purpose of the nervous system is to allow rapid coordination of the different types of cells from around the body. So we can take in stimuli from both inside and outside the body, sort of make decisions about what should be done. Should you ignore the stimulus? Should you react to the stimulus? And then send out instructions either to muscles or glands to do something. So it allows us to respond. So the nervous system is sort of a rapid communication system that allows us to recognize what's going on, again, make decisions either consciously or subconsciously, and then send out instructions to organs that can perform some sort of response, either glands that release hormones or things like sweat or whatever the case may be, or to muscles that can contract and move the skeleton and allow the body to respond. Now, there are lots of different types of cells involved in the nervous system, but the key cell is the neuron because the neurons send those rapid signals that allow the different portions of the nervous system to communicate with one another. Now, in terms of the relevant parts of a neuron, this is just sort of an overview of the nervous system, so we only really need to pay attention to three parts in terms of the AP curriculum. The cell body, which sort of acts the most like a standard cell. It's where a lot of the organelles are found. So it's where a lot of the sort of standard metabolic activity of the cell occurs. And then the real communication parts are the axon and dendrites. Now, the prefix dender means tree. So the dendrites are the receiving portion of the neuron. And a neuron will have many dendrites so that it can receive input from multiple other cells. So before a cell necessarily makes a decision about whether to send a signal on, it can receive input from multiple other cells. So that way you can have this sort of coordinated decision-making process where multiple cells have the ability to send on input to another cell, and then that cell can make a determination about whether or not to fire and send the signal on. And then the axon is sort of like the long wire that connects neurons to one another. Neurons can have very long axons that can span great distances. So you basically rapidly send the signal from one cell to another. Rather than releasing chemicals into the bloodstream and taking the time for chemicals to travel around the blood, you can have electrical signals be sent rapidly. So in milliseconds, you can have signals travel from your brain down to your toes. Now, how do neurons provide that communication? Again, those long wires, the axons, send signals electrically. So there's changes in membrane potential down the length of the axon. But then the connections between cells are chemical. And that's what we typically think of as neurotransmitters, or there are neurohormones where like the hypothalamus can release hormones that go to the pituitary gland. But generally speaking, at least in this chapter, we're going to be dealing with neurotransmitters. So chemicals can be released between cells, and then the electrical signal that travels down the axon rapidly distributes a signal as well. Now, what sort of information processing can occur? So this sort of puts together a few neurons to show sort of how they behave. So you can have a sensory neuron that detects all sorts of stimuli, change in body temperature, pain, mechanical pressure, whatever the case may be. And then that receptor will fire off an action potential, an electrical signal, that travels to what's called an interneuron. Inter means between, right? So this looks at like a cross section of the spinal cord. So the interneuron can receive that input, and then if it's stimulated to fire, it can do, in this case, two things. It can send instructions out to a motor neuron, which in this case connects to muscle to have you reflexively pull your hand back. And because the wires bifurcate or split, it can send information up to your brain so you recognize that it hurts and you can remember that. So that just shows a reflex arc with the interaction of three different neurons. Now, one thing to note with this is that when neurons do communicate, there is a one-way flow of information. The receiving cell receives information through its dendrites. The electrical signal is sent on through the axon, and then that's detected by the dendrites of the next cell. It's called the postsynaptic cell. So we'll get into the why of one-way transmission in just a little bit. The last thing to mention here, the connection between neurons, again, it's a chemical connection, not a physical connection. Electrical impulses can travel down the axon, and when those electrical impulses reach the end of the axon, it's called the synaptic terminal, you can release these chemicals or neurotransmitters that dock on receptors on the postsynaptic cell and either make that next cell more likely or less likely to fire off an electrical signal and continue the message on. So that's just sort of a general intro into the nervous system. In the next segment, we'll actually get into the electrical signaling that occurs when neurons fire